Now, welcome everybody to this iteration of Connect, Inspire, Share. This is another one we're all very excited about. And before we start, we'll actually, as part of our start, not before we start, we have started, I'll offer our welcome to country. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are all today. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'm speaking to you from Boonwurrung land, so in Melbourne. Please feel free to tell us where you are coming from in the chat. I'd also like to now introduce our speaker, who I'm sure is known to all of you because he's a long time all person, a bit of a all stalwart, is David. After completing his PhD in physics, David lectured in mathematics at the Australian Defence Force Academy for 6 years before making the transition to being a learning advisor at UQ at the end of the last millennium. Although he works with students in all disciplines at all levels to develop their communication and learning skills, David has particular interests in helping students develop their statistical literacy, communicate quantitative information effectively, and the use of mind, concept, and argument maps to support writing, learning, and critical thinking. So I'm very excited to remind you that David is talking to us about AI and large language model use today. And he poses the question, what insights can come from AALL teams, and how do we ensure that we are developing and sharing these insights? So welcome, David, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome everybody. So yeah, the questions were posed by Rowena at her talk a couple of months ago on this topic, and I thought I'd follow up on that, although I'll do that towards the latter part of the presentation. The images on the front are, I'm sure you feel like I do, that the pace of change is enormous and you're on a hamster wheel running as fast as you can and barely not keeping up, and not keeping up as the case may be. The other thing is a headline from just a few days ago where some expert is saying that, yeah, okay, fewer teachers employed, possibly even none. That was a bit of a throwaway line. He did come back and say that he did think there was a role for teachers, but potentially quite different in the future. You know, a lot of around motivation, facilitating discussion, and a whole range of other things. And that's a whole complex issue itself. But I think we need to be ready for the changes that are coming and keep on top of the changes. I'm reminded by a movie called Hidden Figures, which was about three prominent women who were in the background of the space race in the 1960s. And one of the women led what was called the calculator group. You know, back before there were big mainframe computers, a lot of the calculations that needed to be done were done by humans in rooms, passing bits of paper to each other. They were a human computer. And at some point during the movie, big IBM computers got brought in. And one of the leaders of the calculators, as they were called, realized this was an opportunity. So when she started learning, she realized, okay, they're not going to need calculators anymore, but they are going to need programmers. So let's train up all these women calculators to be programmers to help the flight engineers and that, you know, drive these computers. And I think we're going to need to be the same sort of attitude with catching this wave of AI. Oops. Yeah, okay, so a bit of an outline of the presentation. So I wanted to set some context and catch up, because you might not be able to catch up with all the news initially, and then move on to what insights can come from academic language and learning teams around writing and learning, and then finish up with a final group discussion on how we can ensure we're developing and sharing these insights with academics and students. So, okay, something's not working. So there's a few issues here that I wanted to cover across this, but I think my next slide is actually going to introduce that. So I'm going to move on to that immediately. This can be sort of, for reference of what we're going to talk about. Now, I want to show you a few minutes from a keynote presentation by Ethan Mollick. He's a professor in a business school in the US, and he teaches innovation and entrepreneurship. And so he's recognized as a bit of a leader on the integrating AI into the classroom. So I think he's got some really interesting things to say that's going to frame the broader discussion today. So I'm going to play a few minutes of that presentation.
So among many things that I've been experimenting with AI, I've been requiring in the class, I want to talk to you a little about that. But I want us to have some ground rules about what I think AI is going to look like in classrooms in the near future. And so the answer is it's going to be undetectable, ubiquitous, and transformative. And all of these images, by the way, I did in Mid-Journey in 3 seconds, right? So if they all have the right number of fingers now, that problem is solved. But it's pretty amazing you can generate these kind of graphics instantly, right? But undetectable in that we know that you cannot detect AI plagiarism, right? Not just in the short term, it's possible. In the long term, it's not possible. There's both theoretical reasons why it's not possible, but also I found that when I prompted my students to actually do a good job writing AI-based essays, they become undetectable. Just 2 or 3 rounds, and it's impossible for any of these systems to find out what they are. So
what do you mean by, get them to do a good job? I'm going to come back to this later in the presentation and look at this in a bit more detail. But this is the sort of thing that he teaches his students. So yes, the thing we're worried about is the student just say, generate a 5-paragraph essay on whatever my topic is and stopping there. But the next few steps are the student working with the AI and criticizing it and giving it feedback and giving it direction and corrections. And I'll look at that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. But this is a bit of a taste of what he means, that it doesn't take too much work to overcome the problems of the AI detectors. We'll also look at that in a moment as well, in that they are picking up false positives.
Of course, who knows what plagiarism is anymore, right? Is working with the AI to come up with an outline that you don't use plagiarism. Asking it for 30 ideas for your essay and picking the one you like best, plagiarism. Asking to rewrite a paragraph that you didn't like before. I've had students come up to me and say, English is my 4th language, and I don't do very well in English, and people don't take me seriously as a result, and now I just use AI to do all the writing, and now I'm taken seriously. Is that bad? Is that plagiarism? We don't know. We have to.
So I think there's some key ideas that he's bringing up there about what constitutes plagiarism, and if this is a tool that's readily available in the workplace, then shouldn't students do it? But it is complicated, as he said. But he also brought in the idea of equity, that this can actually help students whose English isn't their first language to communicate more effectively, but also to understand text more effectively. And these are the things that are going to need to be debated, because a lot of the debate has been about people worrying about students just stopping at step 1, which is obviously not a great idea and violates academic integrity. But the question is, you can do a lot more than just simply ask it to write the essay for you. You can ask for outlines, ask it for ideas, for questions, ask it for feedback, ask it to improve your poorly written text, and then work on that. And the question is, what is going to be good versus, not so good in terms of pedagogical goals?
To grapple with some of these questions in a serious way. Ubiquitous in that what makes AI so interesting is it's a tool available to over 1 billion people right now. And if you're rich, you have no better access than if you don't have a lot of money, right? The same tools available everywhere. You can use GPT-4, the latest model, free through Bing. In the purple creative mode, that's what you use GPT-4. And you can actually use this system right now to do everything. It's in the hands of every teacher everywhere, right? So everything that you guys are doing in building EdTech, there's now a universal AI in everybody's hands. It is ubiquitous not just among students, but among teachers. Not everyone's figured that out yet, but they will soon. And it's transformative in that we don't quite know what to do with this, right? I was on the stage yesterday and I was saying the original definition of the singularity, you may have heard of the AI singularity, right? The idea of a singularity is past that point, we can't predict what's gonna happen. And that's where we are right now. If you ask me, and I teach at a business school, what the future of jobs looks like 2 to 3 years out, I don't really know. I know that we're seeing 20 to 80% performance improvements at white-collar tasks with AI. 20 to 80%. Steam power was 25%. I don't know what we do with that information, right? I don't know whether people do more work than they did before, whether the nature of jobs changes. I can't give you an answer to that, but we don't know what's going to happen. A lot is going to happen in the near future. And it's transformative to education, too. I think that we have a real advantage here on the education side for those who are educators, that I think we're going to be fine. I think that what we just saw from the amazing speech by Sal Khan is that there are tools that will make education better and more effective. We'll figure out, there'll still be a need for classrooms. At least in the medium term, we're fine. We'll figure this stuff out, but it is going to transform things, right? And if you haven't seen this, this is the trend in AI test scores. And keep in mind, GPT 3.5, that's ChatGPT, that was released back at the end of November, and GPT-4 just came out. The bar exam, this is the percentile it's scored among all human students, right? Not the percent right. It went from 5% right to scoring 85%, better than 85% of people on the bar exam. At the 99th percent of the GRE verbal, at the 80th percentile in quantitative, just passed the neurosurgeon bar exam, qualifying exam, a paper just showed a couple days ago. This is changing the way we think of testing, right?
The flip side of all of those, the fact that it's so smart, is that it's also possible to turn it into an effective tutor. And so that might allow more tutoring of students who otherwise would have poor access to it. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So there's a paper I read recently talking about the paradoxical nature. On the one hand, it's a threat to academic integrity. On the other hand, it could help tutor people and improve educational outcomes in many ways.
If we're testing people on these kind of characteristics, the AI is passing that. What does that mean? Again, past singularity, I can't give you the answer, but it certainly forces us to grapple with this in some kind of useful, interesting way. So things are changing fundamentally. How do we start to deal with that? I'm going to propose 3 levels of adjustment we're going through. And I know some of you are educators, some of you are from ed tech companies. I want to kind of talk to all of that. So the first thing we can do is we can expect more from students. That's the first level. So I actually have mandatory AI in my class. I want to show you my AI syllabus question, and I'll make sure you have access to all of this. So you don't have to read it all, don't worry. But I required everyone to use AI for everything, okay? So I gave them the basic rules. It lies to you a lot. You're responsible for its content, right? It rewards good work. If you don't do good effort into putting together prompts, you won't get good outcomes from those prompts, right? It's a tool, and it's one you have to acknowledge. So they have to list all the prompts they used and write a reflection on what worked and what didn't. So it completely changed how the class worked. And I'm lucky enough to teach a business class, right? So it's about outcomes and doing things. If it was a fundamental writing class, I think some of the solutions you saw earlier, and again, we'll solve those, blue books, working outside of class.
So blue books are basically, the old exam booklets, paper and pencil, type of thing. So he's not saying, AI is for everybody. He's saying you need different solutions in different cases. It's not one or the other, because one of the things that I'm worried about is dichotomous either or thinking rather than both and that you've got to tailor the solution to the group and your educational goals.
Let's work with those AI tutors. All of those things will help us solve these problems. but embracing AI is really powerful. One class, for example, before AI, I had the students come with a theoretical product design. It was about designing new products, and create and test a really early prototype, write an outline of the results. With AI in the class, it became come with a product design, build the product using laser cutters, build a working app, create a marketing material, create graphics, write a full report. All of that, right, and for people who've never done any of this before, right? And so they were building board games in this class. Here's some happy students with the outputs they came up with. This was for just a 4-week-long class, right? Like, this was not that many sessions together.
Yes, I think it's one of the key things that comes out of it. As he said, students, you can expect more. They can work faster, produce more. All right, so yeah, I'm not going to go through the rest of the presentation. It's unfortunate at normal speed, he speaks too fast, but at 3/4 speed, it sounds like he's a bit drunk. But anyway, I thought it was easier to slow him down a bit. All right, so moving on a bit more sort of context, I think university policies are still in a state of refinement. They're still trying to work out what the best way to handle with it. I think what's common is what's happening at UQ at the moment, which is simply prohibit AI use. But I find this statement a bit problematic because students are advised that the use of AI technologies is strictly prohibited. But hang on, Grammarly is AI powered. Does that mean that they're now saying students can't use Grammarly? And there's a recent article by some Sydney Uni academics, which point out the problem of Microsoft Office products. Microsoft Word is going to have GPT-4 built into it, editing. So, telling people they can't use AI is going to become impossible very, very quickly. To some extent, it's just going to be built into all the products students use. Option 2, in-person assessment not permitting use of AI. And I think there's a lot of reason for still keeping those sorts of things that I'll come back to later. And then finally, some sort of complex authentic assessment using AI, like what we've seen with Ethan Mollick's classes. And so, yeah, but may appropriately use. Well, hang on, what does appropriately use? Must clearly reference. Well, how do they reference and acknowledge? So this is raising questions that I'll come back to later on about, can we bring some more nuance to this? Because a lot of the discussion has been thinking just dichotomous, we either ban it or AI writes the whole assignment for them, and there's a whole lot in between that we need to consider. Okay, some other things that interesting recent news is just a few days ago, the government announced that they've come up with a draft framework for schools. And I've heard through the grapevine that Texas is going to have a really close look at that to consider what its recommendations for universities are going to be, because obviously as the next stage after schools, we need to know what's going on there. At the moment, they're consulting with schools, and so, yeah, it could be a while before the full framework is publicly released. But a couple of days before that announcement, South Australia announced that they're actually bringing in, they're going to trial a style app. But it's not just an app where you ask it a question, it gives you the answer. You can train these things to be tutors so that students ask a question and you'll respond with a hint or a suggestion, or we'll ask a counter question. If you want some idea of how that actually works and what it looks like, then if you're aware of the Khan Academy, then at the same conference that Ethan Mollick was just presenting at, Sal Khan from the Khan Academy also presented on how they're developing personalized maths tutoring by combining GPT-4, which is a language model and not very good at maths, with Wolfram Alpha, which is one of the top computational engines in mathematics, and they've got training in beta testing. Anyway, his talk gives you some little excerpts showing how these things would work. So if you want to sort of see how these tutors might work, then that's a little video you can go on and watch. It's quite interesting. All right, so more context, what do we know about the student perspective? And there's been calls for, we want to know more about what students are thinking about and worried about. And one survey, recently surveyed, 4,000 undergraduates in Japan, And, 32.4% said they'd use ChatGPT. A bit surprising it's that low. And interesting though, 28.4% considered using the assignments cheating. Now, the question is, are they lacking nuance? Now, if they think using it for assignment is ChatGPT, write my assignment for me, well, obviously that is cheating. But the nuance is, yeah, but you could use it to generate an outline. You could use it to give you feedback. You could use it to help understand difficult, philosophy text or something like that. 14% said they have used it for assignments. And I'll give you a moment to just read through the findings. So you can see that they're using it for a lot more reasons than just writing their assignment for them. About a quarter said they didn't use it because it can give incorrect answers. Now that's true, but that was also thinking that, I'm going to get the answer from the chatbot, as opposed to I'm going to use it for outlines or giving it feedback on my writing or things like that. Another survey recently that was on ABC News. This was an interesting one. An engineering student used it to help him debug code. I was at a talk a couple of months ago where a coding professor said a lot of students give up after their first coding course because debugging is everybody has bugs, but they think, I mustn't be very good at coding because my code always has bugs. It's so painful or whatever. And he thinks that if he allows students to use GPT-4 or ChatGPT to help them debug their code, that will take a lot of the pain out of coding, and a lot more students might think that actually I can actually do quite good and continue on. It wasn't clear how he stops it from just writing the code completely, because it can actually do that. But it's interesting also that these models don't just provide the answer. They can also point out what the error is, explains why it's an error, and teaches you how to solve it. So yeah, that online instant tutor and taking the pain out of some aspects of our work. An arts law student said they used ChatGPT to get up to speed on complex concepts. So the lecturer mentions something you don't understand, you can just do a quick ChatGPT and get an answer. Oh, okay, that's what they're talking about. And an ESL PhD student expressing in English, not just for assignments or for her research works, but in promoting her work through Twitter, LinkedIn posts, things like that. It's quite good at condensing things. The professor at UQ I was talking to recently wrote something for a journalist, and it was 1,300 words. And the journalist came back to him and said, hang on, you've only got room for 800, cut it back to 800. He asked ChatGPT to do it. And of course, then checked what ChatGPT came up with. Saved him an enormous amount of time, because I'm sure you're aware of how much time and effort it takes to cut something back from 1,300 words to 800 words and still have it make sense. And this is something that these chatbots are actually quite good at. Another piece from the conversation recently is students sort of saying, don't assume we're just going to use it to cheat. We know it's here. We know it's going to be part of our jobs in the future. Help us learn how to use these effectively. Help us learn how to, value add on top of what they can do. So yeah, that's what they're after. And so that's what we're going to have to work at in delivering. So another presentation I went to back in April, a lecturer at the University of Auckland Business School said, these are the questions her students are asking her. Can I use ChatGPT? Well, I want to say, well, for what exactly? Writing your assignment, planning it, understanding complex texts. Can I use ChatGPT to improve my English? And one potential risk for that is that it might lead your work to be flagged as likely written by AI. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And then they asked, also, if lazy students use it to get better grades, how can I do better than them? And an addition on that would be, how can we help students learn how to use it in a way that they can convince future employers to employ them rather than just employ the chatbot? Okay, concerns about AI detectors have come up. So AI detectors look for tells. Two tells that are common are perplexity, how complex or sophisticated the word choice is, and burstiness, variation in sentence length. Chatbots tend to write very readable output, but use more simple language and very consistent, links. The thing is, there are YouTube videos that tell you how to cheat ChatGPT to look out for this and rewrite it to avoid it. And as Ethan Mollick said, if you go through a few iterations to try and improve on what it's done, then, you can fool the detectors. We've also, one of my colleagues has met with a few students who claim that they only use Grammarly to refine their text, but it was flagged as AI written, and they got called in for academic, possible academic misconduct charges, which is very, very stressful. So as a result of that, we're suggesting students keep a copy of their original draft unchanged, and then work on a copy with Grammarly, so that if they do get pulled in, they can say, well, here's my original draft to show that I did write this, it is just Grammarly. Formulaic writing, such as TOEFL essays, can be a problem. So some people fed some detectors some TOEFL essays, and they classified over half as AI generated. These were written by human beings under TOEFL conditions, but because it's very formulaic, the detector said, oh, this is AI generated. And in fact, as many as 97% were flagged by at least one of the detectors as being AI written. And so, yeah, another ABC report saying international students are saying they're being picked up for things that, really aren't fair. So, that could be something to be aware of and point out to students. Right. Other things you can do, AI tells is, if you're in an assignment, it looks like it's a rush job, it goes off in tangents, talks about irrelevant stuff or whatever, but it lacks grammatical and punctuation errors, that's a suggestion that maybe it's been written by a chatbot. All right, so just a quick open up to the floor, if anybody wants to jump in and just say anything. Outside of actually your workshops teaching this stuff with students, have you had any interesting observations about how students are using this or misusing it, or apparent false positives? So we're going to allow time for a couple of people to make a couple of comments. If anyone's got anything to share. Yep, Steve.
I think Emma Mulak had something to something in the chat about neurodivergent writers. Emma, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so in some discussion threads on Mastodon a few months ago, when there was some big announcement about AI, but there were some autistic and some dyslexic writers on Mastodon who ran their material through an AI detector, and they were much more likely to be pinged as likely to be AI, probably because these are two groups that are frequently misunderstood in the for autistic writers, because we have a very different frame of reference, and so we end up having to explain ourselves very simply and explicitly to get our point across. And dyslexic writers, because they're used to keeping a very close eye on spelling, etc. And so what they produce as a result can tend to fit more of that, very, very regular patterns. Also just tend to adhere more to like, your paragraph should have a topic sentence and then a development and then a conclusion, which I've noticed that a lot of actual students don't do. Sometimes the hallmarks that are being pinged by AI are just that it's actually good writing in terms of its structure and predictability and adherence to rule.
Yeah, good, thanks, Emma. Anna?
Hey, it just happened that I went on long service leave when AI was being born at a in a university setting, and I came back and it was in full swing. So I had to adjust pretty quickly, and we had a student in the first year unit who actually used the Monash University acknowledgement template to say, I've used AI. We then drew the students' attention to the fact that they were supposed to use AI to generate, to brainstorm ideas, but not to actually then use it in the assignment. And it was a bit of a learning curve that, as you said, students don't keep their drafts. And if they do, like in that particular case, we were able to locate one and in a couple of others, but I think I just wanted to draw everyone's point to, with another student, we were not able to do it. And I don't even know how to start writing an email telling a student that I don't think you've done it all by yourself. So I think I would be really grateful for any templates for writing emails like this. Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things I'll come back to at the end is how can we share our expertise? So, those sorts of template emails could be quite useful to bring up there. All right, so moving on to what insights can come from the academic language and learning sort of perspective, let's look at, writing initially and AI literacy. So in terms of AI literacy, I came across an interesting article recently, which did a literature review on AI literacy and things like that. And this is the definition that they came up with. I'll give you a moment to read that, although I added "and ethically." I mean, they do understand the ethical implications, but it wasn't part of their definition. So key elements: critically evaluate the terms, communicate and collaborate effectively. So collaboration is an interesting word, which is very much like what the Ethan Mollick example was doing, and then, use it as a tool. And the conceptual framework is, well, what is AI? Can you recognize it? What can it do? How does it work? How should it be used? Now, in their article, they tended to focus mostly on ethical use in the workplace. And so, there are a lot of ethical uses in the workplace. They don't really cover ethical use in academic settings, but we all are aware of what those are. So things like awareness of copyright infringement, which I'll come back to, data privacy, don't put personal information into it because then it might get shared around the world, and respect for academic integrity. So you need to acknowledge it appropriately and approve uses only. So Brendan sort of said, the edit as they go, using the editing tools. Yes. Okay, that's an interesting question. There's a discussion point later on, and we might break out. You might bring that up in your discussion group, Brendan. All right, so looking at critically evaluating AI tools, the first thing is understanding how they actually work. Although apparently we don't precisely know how they work, we've only got a bit of an idea. But one of the key things is, even though they're called intelligent, they're actually just looking for patterns and putting through patterns. It's not like they've gone out and thought about it, understood the web, and giving you the informed answer. So as Rodney Brooks said, they tell you what the answer should sound like. So if they don't know, they will interpolate and give things. And it gives answers with complete confidence. I asked it, did you make these references up? And it said, oh, sorry, maybe the links have changed. Like, well, I've looked at the journals. These articles do not exist. So it doesn't know that it doesn't know. To understand a little bit more about why they work the way they do, a couple of references here. So JPEGs, if you zoom in enough, they get very pixelated. And so these language models are pixelated. And so they have to interpolate between the pixels. So they're guessing what the bits are between. So that's one thing. And this gets a bit technical, but it's quite interesting, the first part of it, about how these things actually work and how in some ways they're just a very sophisticated predictive text. They're predicting what should come next based on patterns they've observed in the internet and so on. Now, because they can hallucinate, invent things, then we need to make sure that students are convinced that they need to fact check what they're doing. And perhaps one way of convincing them is news headlines like this about a couple of lawyers getting themselves into trouble because they've used ChatGPT to generate relevant cases, submitted that to the court, and the court said, hey, these cases don't exist. Another problem is, here's another one, sued for defamation because some radio host was, I don't know, accused of being, a pedophile or something like that, even though he really wasn't. And, even scientists apparently are not aware that it will make up references for you. And so this article had to get, retracted. Another thing is, though, that even if you say, oh, I didn't get it to write it, I got it to improve my own draft, is that it can introduce misconceptions even there. So here's an example from a engineering text. I'll give you a moment to read that. And I'm sure you're going, oh, gee, okay, my mind's just blowing up. That's completely unreadable. And it did quite a good job. So I'll give you a moment to read its revised version. Now, that's a lot easier to read. And one of my concerns is a lot of weak students will look at that and go, oh, that's fantastic, and not think critically about it. Because the problem is the red bit are not additional things that you're trying to do. It's how you achieve the best sensitivity and specificity. And so, but a human being with a bit of knowledge and understanding can easily correct this revised version and put through achieving the best sensitivity and specificity through uniform fat suppression and so on. And so, yes, but it still requires a human being to look at the improved version and say, okay, has it introduced a misconception? Is it really saying what I want it to say? Now, Elsevier, the big publisher, if you use generative AI in their writing, they require a statement at the end which says the author has reviewed and edited the content as needed and takes full responsibility for the content of the publication. The question is, do we need to require students to sign something like that? And the question is, does it help at all? Because I know that as editor of Joule, people tick a bunch of boxes saying they've done A, B, C, D before they've submitted it, and lots of papers haven't done A, B, C, D. So I know people just tick boxes without actually reading what they're ticking. But that's a question to think about. Right. So also, to work effectively, students need to know enough about writing to evaluate and improve upon AI-suggested text. So I'll show you in a later slide the input. So what I did was I took a whole bunch of notes from different articles on the question of team social integration or cohesion and its impact on group performance. And I just fed ChatGPT the structured notes and said, write a paragraph on this, and you can read this in your own time. It's quite a solid job, but reviewing it, you sort of think, hang on, crucial factor, that wasn't in the notes. Is that an exaggeration? Also, this topic sentence only factors on half the argument. Yes, it is helpful, but you can have too much of a good thing, just like having too much chocolate makes you feel sick. Also, because it's been trained on the internet, it's quite a good writer, but like a lot of academics, it seems to think you can leave out, the logical connectives, which impede flow. And then this last bit at the end, it's like, well, yeah, okay, so what, that these people found this? I didn't put in the inference from that thing in my notes, and it couldn't infer what the conclusion could be, and so it just summarized it. And so it doesn't answer the so what question. So a good solid job. A lot of students would probably be, quite happy with this. But if they're going to do better than the AI, they need to know, okay, is this topic sentence introducing the whole paragraph? Are the logical connectors there? Have I answered the so what? They need to know about writing in order to critique it. Okay, communicate effectively with AI. So obviously students need to know how to prompt engineer. And I wonder whether this will actually help improve students, because if they put something vague in, they're going to get something poor out. And maybe by forcing students to really clearly articulate what they're after, that might really be a really good thing, that they get clear in their own mind what they want. Here's an example of some researchers and how they get the AI chatbot to edit the manuscript and sort of being very precise about what they want. So what's the title of the piece? What's the piece? Okay, it's from the introduction. What do I want to choose? We want to minimize jargon, we want the grammar correct, and so on and so on. So yeah, I mean, if some guides on prompt engineering, some links here for future reference. But expert use presupposes the existence of foundational skills and knowledge. And this is where I'm worried that people are going to go, yeah, let's go full AI without thinking about, have students got the foundational skills and knowledge to use AI effectively? So going back to Ethan Mollick's example, yes, first step, generate a 5-paragraph essay on selecting leaders. Well, okay, you've done no work there. Okay, but then you start working with the AI. So the third paragraph isn't right. The Babel effect is da-da-da. You have to have content knowledge to point out errors in what it might says. And then, okay, add more details, add an example. So you have to think, okay, what's good writing? Illustrative examples are important. Okay, picks up another error. So also realizes with writing the importance of examples to illustrate things, bring things to life. Or critical thinking, do not use examples that feature only men, so be a bit more inclusive. What do I want? I want to end on a hopeful note, not a depressing note, so giving feedback. So really to work at this level, you need content knowledge and you need understanding of good writing principles as well. So I think we need to take a developmental approach. We still need to teach people how to write effectively. We still need to teach people, and people need to learn the content before they can work at this level. Yeah, this is some other helpful stuff that might be useful. This example, I'm not going to go through in detail. These scientists actually wrote a whole paper, apparently in an hour. But the key point, again, I want to make here is that they couldn't just tell it to write the paper, okay? They had to give it feedback. They had to know about coding errors and what the analysis errors were as well. They needed how to build it step by step based on the products of the previous thing. So they needed a lot of insight into writing papers. And they did notice they tend to fill in gaps by making things up. As I said, these language models are like blurry JPEGs. Their knowledge is pixelated, and they tend to interpolate what they don't know. And it follows patterns. And so one pattern it found was, scientific papers should say I'm addressing a gap in literature. Well, hang on, this was not a gap. It was more about reinforcing what we already know, more evidence. So there wasn't really a gap. It was confirming with greater detail and a bigger study what was already known. So it was just following a pattern, not thinking about what was appropriate for this particular context. Someone used Gen A on their Pella. Well, yeah, okay, that's a problem. Yeah, so one of the things that thinking through what's appropriate use, because people are, Matt Miller sort of suggesting, okay, what's relevant to their future and what would you use as your work as professional? But I'm not sure that's the right question. I think that's where we want to end up, maybe in third year or something like that, then professional use. Ethan Mollick's class, I think, is at the master's level. So maybe at that level, you would want to be thinking about, professional use. But I think we need a developmental approach across, first, second, and whatever, gradually building on what we can expect students to work with. But we'll come back to that and see if you agree or disagree. So one of the things that I wonder whether it could be useful, because I used to be a maths lecturer, and we've had this problem for at least 35 years, that computers can solve calculus. So why do we still get students to learn how to do calculus by hand? Come to think of it, we've had calculators for 50, 60 years, and we still get students to learn mental arithmetic in primary school. Why do we do that? So this article by Bookburker, I think, covers a lot of the key ideas. And his sort of analogy is white boxes are, how it's working. You know the algorithms, you can do it. So in principle, you could do what the computer program is if you're willing to spend, a lot of time. Black box is, I've got no idea how it works. I've got no idea how writing works. I'm just going to put some stuff in, and whatever comes out is whatever comes out. And so his suggestion is, and this is what the approach we take in mathematics, is if it's an area that's new to students, we do things by hand. Because that's where they develop mathematical insight and acquire mathematical techniques. If you haven't done arithmetic by hand, you've got no feel for numbers. You punch some things in a calculator and put the decimal point in the wrong place, you won't recognize that the answer is completely ridiculous if you've got no feel for numbers built through work. And so, yes, start simple, do simple stuff. So an example from writing would be to talk about PEEL, the structured paragraphs, signposting, cohesive devices, genre move analysis, and so on. And then you need to figure out how you can exploit that base knowledge to ask clearly. You can't ask the AI to improve its draft if you can't say, oh, I need a stronger topic sentence that introduces this. Put more cohesive devices in, provide some illustrative examples to illustrate that point. So if you haven't mastered those basics yourself. And then stage 2 is when you've sort of mastered those basics and you're sort of doing these really hard, intractable problems or very time-consuming problems, then you bring in the computer because you know what it's doing and you know how to use it effectively. So a very simple example of why this is useful is that technology takes time. There's a startup cost. Very simple example. You're playing a dice game, roll 2 dice. Oh, 3 plus 5. Got to pull out my phone, pull up the calculator, add that up. I don't think so. You can do it in your head a lot faster. At some point, there's a break-even point. For me, if you've ever played Yahtzee, which is a game with 5 dice, for me, that's my break-even. I can add up my scores across the score sheet in my head about as fast as my daughters can do with their phones. Anything harder, yes, I would go AI. Certainly when I produce the all budget, I don't do that by hand. I don't even use a calculator. I use a spreadsheet because if I change a number, add a line or whatever, it all recalculates everything instantly for me with complete precision. But there's a lot of time setting up these spreadsheets, but it's worth it for really more complex sorts of things. But not everything's that complex. People have to be able to verbally discuss. You can't say, in a team meeting or with a client, hang on, I'll just see what ChatGPT says on this. Clients expect you to be able to articulate with them. And the question is, you need to practice those base level skills of pulling ideas together, organizing your thinking, articulating, expressing your ideas. You need that practice. You can't let the AI basically do it for you and then, tweak that. And so the question is, if AI is overused, will students lose that fluency? And that's a question I've got of concerned. All right, so looking at what can all educators bring to the conversation, I'll bring in conversation in just a moment, is that there's a lot more between banning AI, it's not allowed, and it writes the whole assignment, for you. So there's a whole continuum between entirely human generated and entirely AI generated. So at the lower end, traditional work or simply proofreading, copy editing, so grammar or whatever. At the bottom end, either the student adopts side or they edit AI work. But there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle, such as student writes a draft and asks for advice on how to improve things a little bit, might ask for help with the plan, maybe it helps understand difficult text, summarize things, or you might take notes and go, okay, can you turn these notes into a coherent paragraph for me? And then the Ethan Mollick example was AI as a co-pilot. Student uses AI as a co-author, co-editor, collaborator sort of thing. So there's a whole continuum there. And this is the example I showed you before. So this is what I fed to ChatGPT. So I just copied and pasted my structured notes and said, turn it into an essay, and this is what it came up with. And it could understand that these notes belonged with this author, these belongs with this author, and these notes belonged here. So it could understand copying and pasting this sort of multi-level structured notes and come up with a paragraph. So, that's a possibility. Another way of thinking about it is the stages of writing. So we run workshops at UQ, and you probably do the same thing about this, 10 steps to a better assignment or something like that. And so you can think about the different stages of the writing process and thinking about different levels of AI support at each level. And so the question then is, okay, finding sources. ChatGPT is unreliable, but there are programs like Elicit that are quite reliable for doing, literature reviews. And so, the question is this a good framework for thinking about when students ask us, can we use ChatGPT? Maybe we have a table where it's got this list and you say, tick, 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 cross, 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 cross. Yes, you can use it for these things, but no, you can't use it for these other things. Would that be useful for talking to students? But even thinking about a staged approach, what stages are good at what level of development? Identifying key themes. So I did an exercise with students where I gave them a whole bunch of article titles and said, group these thematically. You're doing a literature review, group them thematically. I also used ChatGPT to do it, and it did a pretty good job, not quite exactly what I came up with. But also you could do this yourself. If you get students to feed you in a whole bunch of qualitative research, then you can ask it to thematically organize for you. All right, so I want to open up the floor again to ask people, have you used a GenIO tool in one of your workshops or individually with students to help them develop a skill or to teach them how it can help them with support or whatever? What did you use it for? What was your rationale? What were your impressions in terms of how it worked? On my own account, on one occasion, I was working with a student in business, and they asked me, hang on, the assignment task sheet says, analyze some political thing using 2 different theoretical lenses. And I thought, okay, what does that mean? I understood what it mean, but I didn't have any concrete examples to come up with. And so I asked ChatGPT, came up with 2 really simple concrete examples to illustrate theoretical lenses in the political situation. And also I do a lot of workshops on mind mapping to help you structure your thoughts and then develop outlines. And I've said to students, look, if you're having trouble with this, then this is how you can get ChatGPT to write you an outline. And here's an example, and I made a bit of a critique of its strengths and weaknesses. That's about the limits of what I've done, but I'd be interested to know if other people have done some things and what you found so far.
I actually didn't use it. I watched as my daughter used it, David. I haven't used it with students at work or in a workshop, but she had to write short answers in order to define key terms as part of an activity in one of her programs. And she said, is it okay if I look up ChatGPT because they explain them pretty well? And I said, yeah, you can, but I wouldn't be using those definitions. You can rewrite them. And that's exactly what she did. And she found it really super useful in order to A, understand the terms, and B, develop the language by which she could start to paraphrase. So she was actually learning paraphrasing on the go without meaning to and without intending to. But she had an intuitive sense without really me saying, hey, don't do this, that she shouldn't really do it.
Yeah, so I've got a daughter who's doing a very difficult philosophy course, and she wants to be a paramedic, and so she can't see the point of it. And so she's been using it to help, okay, what do these philosophers mean by this? She getting some background insight before she struggles with actually reading the difficult texts.
I actually like to hear more about Miriam Sullivan's use of ChatGPT in individual appointments. Could she explain that a bit more if she's available on mic?
Yeah, happy to jump in. Similar to what David says, like if they're struggling to understand a particular concept, I'll be like, well, I'm not in that discipline. I can't explain it. What do you think of this explanation? Does that help? And also when they're stuck on a really difficult article and they're like, this article is just written weird and I don't understand what they're saying. I'm like, well, get ChatGPT to give you some dot points explaining it in simple language and now read it again doesn't make more sense now that you've read a simpler version, and that's worked quite well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, important point about now read it again, because the risk is that they'll look at the summary and just go from that, and they'll miss nuances and caveats and limitations and things like that. So yeah, it sounds really good.
Actually, it'll be really interesting collecting or collating some idea, or gathering, or have somewhere being gathered a list of ideas for advising students in these kind of ways.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so there's a question here, Steve, to capture the chat and circulate it as well, because there's a lot of links being dropped in the chat. And so,
yeah, we can do that, David. Sure. Yep.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah.
Good. I should have been here.
Yeah, okay, critical reading. Yeah, I mean, I guess that could be used to, you know, what other authors have insights. So, Kate, did you have something to say? No? All right, so what I want to do now is, let's see. We might only have about 10 minutes to do this, but move into breakout rooms, thinking about that stages of writing and different levels of use that you could use. I want to have a bit of a breakout discussion about what levels of use do you think might be pedagogically helpful, desirable at what stage, you know, or do you think that maybe they can use it right from the word go, but initially we have to really carefully scaffold its use. We have to hold their hands and show them how to use it effectively and whatever, and then gradually move off to the point where they say, okay, you should know how to use it now effectively yourself. So try and remember those stages of writing and different levels of support. And yeah, about 10 minutes of discussion. We could talk about this for hours, but yeah, just my thought is that hopefully a 10-minute discussion might lead to some insights and things that would be useful to follow up on. So Steve, if we can send people to breakout rooms.
Absolutely. Interesting, David. So, sometimes people are worse than the expectations we have on students. We've lost 10 people as soon as you said the word breakout rooms. Come on, people, stick around. All right, opening the rooms now. Alex, Maureen, Renee, Manuel, Shirley, you going to join your rooms? Your room closed, Manuel. Right, where were you? Oh, Lisa's by herself.
I'm on my own. I was on my own as well, Steve.
What room are you in, Rachel?
I was in room 11.
I will put Manuel with you. Move to 11. You should have him there soon.
Okay.
I will move Najia to room 11.
Go back to my room. Right.
Yes, yeah, pop back there, and
Thanks.
hopefully you'll have some friends there shortly.
Thanks.
Okay, Shirley, you able? Oh, I'm losing my voice. Sure, no problem. Gotcha. Manuel, I've put you in room 11 now. If you can join that one. Okay, great. Oh, Manuel, you're back. Actually, I might put you in room 12, Manuel, if you're able to join room 12.
Perfect, thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Maureen, do you want to join a room? Have I got you somewhere? I should have. Oh, you're in room 1, Maureen. Are you able to join?
Everybody's recording in progress. Everybody's back. Yeah, it was a very interesting chat in our room. Hopefully you had interesting chats in yours as well. So something that we're not going to have time to discuss at the moment is, I think, just like students when they apply for jobs are probably going to get asked in interviews, what can you value add on top of ChatGPT? Why should I employ you rather than just ChatGPT? I think in coming years, the same question might be asked of us, because if students can get feedback on their writing, tutoring and things like that, can we be replaced by chatbots? And I don't think we can. I think there's lots of reasons why we can't. The human touch, encouragement, is a big part of our role. I'm not sure a chatbot will do that. Another potential problem is that students, a chatbot will only answer the question you ask it, whereas a learning advisor will say, yeah, but you should also be thinking about X, Y, and Z. An example would be, I gave ChatGPT a paragraph of text and asked, how can I improve that? And I told it the section title, I told it the context, and I gave some generic feedback and I said, you've missed the point. This paragraph goes off topic. It was only when I told it, does this paragraph stay on topic on the section heading, that it then identified, yes, it does go off topic, and it pointed out all the errors and why it was a problem. But it needed to be told explicitly to look for that to actually find it. So I don't have time. Okay, communicate ethically with AI. So understanding difficult text is a really good use of ChatGPT, but if it's copyrighted text and you feed that into it to read, then that can become publicly available. And so that could be a problem. So, chances are they're not going to be successful, but people are suing OpenAI for training people on copyrighted material that becomes, publicly available or for use for people who then don't have to pay to buy the book to get the insight from the book. But there's a conversation link here to copyright. We sort of covered that earlier. Okay, referencing and acknowledging. I think this is still perhaps evolving a little bit. So the APA style blog seems to think that people want to use it to get answers to questions. And in that case, it says, okay, some people have argued, treat it like a personal communication, because if you ask the same question on a different day, you'll get a different answer. But they're saying that no, you should really treat it like an algorithm's output, and hence you should credit the author of the algorithm and then have a reference list. And they have an example of, something like this, which I'll give you a moment to read. And then the reference list looks something like that. Now, my question is, I'm not sure any university level assignment would accept this, because they don't even accept Wikipedia now because it's a secondary source and so on. So I'm not sure this is such a great example. Although, what about something like this? What if a student looks at a difficult text, doesn't really understand what it's saying, gets ChatGPT to do an interpretation, and then acknowledges that they're using ChatGPT's interpretation. So, so they might write something like that. And so the question is, would that be something that's acceptable? But I'll leave that open. Transcripts and appendix, that could be something that students, do, is that they show what they did. But yeah, rapidly running out of time. I like the University of College London guide for acknowledging, although I think perhaps they could probably make it a bit more efficient by molding things. So they sort of say, you should acknowledge, have you used AI? Describe how you've used it, and then reference its use. So what tool did you use? So there's not just ChatGPT, there's all sorts of other tools out there like Elicit. Describe, and they say include the prompts you used, what the output was, and as someone sort of said in chat, that's what you put in appendix. You show in the appendix what it was that you got out of it. And they've got an example of a student who sort of asked for a suggested outline, some background ideas, and they sort of said they, modified the outline and used the background just to help them get started. So yeah, this is the format that they accept. So this could be, useful to consider, because I think just saying to students you should acknowledge use. Yeah, how? What's the format? And so I think we need to have good examples of what acknowledgement actually looks like and what we're expecting. And as I said earlier, I wonder also whether declarations of, yeah, this is my work, but if I did AI, yes, I've reviewed and edited the content as needed and take full responsibility for the content of the publication is important. All right, so learning, just very quickly. So I think my concern is, I've seen articles that claim assessment should only test higher order thinking skills. And I think assessment should test higher order thinking skills, but we all know that a lot of student behaviour is driven by assessment. And so if you don't assess the lower order skills, will they actually practice them? Will they develop them so that they can then use them at the higher order skills? Used to be a serious sports person, so I know that getting good at sports, you don't just play games, you also drills to develop the basic skills. In learning, students use flashcards and retrieval practice, and then applied problem solving, referencing by hand versus EndNote. And as the cognitive scientist Daniel Williams made the point, critical thinking depends on knowing relevant content. You can't think critically about a subject you know nothing about. You need the content. The question is, how do we encourage students to actually learn the content and learn it well enough that they can actually think critically at the higher level? So I think there's going to be a need for still testing of basic remembering and understanding to encourage people to do this, as well as can you put it into practice down the track. An interesting article by Moloch focused on helping us with our teaching, but it also helps students with their learning. So strategy 1, give lots of examples in teaching, and maybe we do a lot of stuff in class where we give them a bunch of examples. What do they have in common? Which do not, compare, contrast exercise. The challenge here is if only 20% of students turn up to class and you want to do a lot of practice in class, how do we actually, encourage that to happen? You can also get it to provide multiple explanations of things, develop low stakes tests. We could encourage students to develop the test themselves. You can ask ChatGPT, create 25 multiple choice questions on this topic, or you could feed it some content from the lectures and say, generate some retrieval questions. The question is, will students do that if they're not enticed to or encouraged to? And there's some other examples too. So again, some more reading to think about in this area. All right, so here's an example of what you can do. So ChatGPT understands Bloom's taxonomy, and so you can give it a topic such as constructivism and ask it to generate, a series of questions at different levels of Bloom taxonomy. So you can use it to not just, regurgitate knowledge. And this could be useful for students to help them understand, because we set assignments where we ask students to produce a self-chosen topic, oral presentation, and often their first questions are basic factual. You can answer with a yes, no. They're not good at thinking of the evaluative, creative type questions. And maybe getting students to do this will help them develop that insight into what higher order questions actually, look like. Right, so how do we ensure we're developing and sharing these insights? And so that's what I want to open the room up for the last 9 minutes, is to, share around the group. What have people been doing in terms of sharing ideas? How do we collectively collaborate with each other? Do we need a shared repository somewhere where we can, download? And an English teacher in the US has got Google Doc, something like that, where she is compiling articles and ideas that she's collecting and things like that. And the question is, do we need something like this? And if so, what's the best place? So open up the floor to discussion, ideas, suggestions.
We have a few minutes left, so if you'd like to either raise your virtual hand or a real one, or unmute yourself and contribute, by all means, this is the time to do that. Rosalie, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Steve, and thank you, David. This has been absolutely terrific, and so nice to pull it all together from an academic language and learning perspective. I really appreciate it. And we also we've been using at UTS your the
Continuum model, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. The continuum model that you put together, that's really useful. One thing that I've been finding useful is that there's a Facebook group called Using AI and Academic Writing. I can't remember. I can post the link to it, and it's actually really useful, where people, mainly American, it's mainly the cohorts from America, I think, but people just talking about using AI to teach academic writing and what they're negotiating with. So I think that's a really handy place to go and get ongoing discussion from our all perspective. So that's just one suggestion.
Yeah, so yes, if you can share that Facebook group link or something, that would be great. So there's a couple of, before I go to Anna, a couple of comments about privacy, IP and things like that with HDR. The reason I bring that up is because there's been cases of people at companies putting confidential stuff into ChatGPT, and then suddenly people are learning about this down the track. So it seems to be capturing what you're putting into it and it's getting out into the wild. Yeah, Anna?
Thank you. I didn't want to steal the floor. I usually do, but not today. However, I wanted to raise a very important issue, and it's the one we discussed in our group, which is that of professional learning for us. I think we are often expected to just absorb whatever happens, like turn it in. Off you go and you become an expert and you start doing it in your work, etc. So I would be super grateful if AALL did more. Today's been wonderful, but I think if, the association could do more in that space. And I'm very curious if anyone's universities have offered something super useful, and if there is a website that's publicly available, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, so Rosalie just dropped into chat the Facebook group, the US one, which could be useful to join. But yes, that's, and perhaps even outside of, because we've only got 5 minutes to go, that this could be a thing too. If you've got ideas, feed them through to your local AALL representative, or maybe send it through to me, and we can sort of maybe then try and figure out some way of moving forward to share that, so we're not all having to reinvent the wheel. You know, I've got you know, that stages of writing. I've got lots of use examples with critical commentary on that, which hopefully I'll be able to publish, you know, fairly soon, so people don't have to reinvent the wheel. But yeah.
That's probably a really good place to stop, David. I think I speak for the room when I say that was a compelling presentation. I think you really broke it down in a really super nuanced way that I think anybody could take something out of the different bits you presented. I certainly did, and I'm going to revisit these slides and look at the chat, which I will save. I'm doing that right now. Yeah, so can you all join me and give a big, either through the chat or visually, a big thank you to David. That was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.